Greetings and welcome to the second episode of Evo Says, the series where I talk about various topics surrounding history, answer your questions, and simply say what has been on my mind. This year has not been particularly fruitful in terms of my channel, as I only managed to get 3 videos out so far, but we like quality over quantity here, don't we? I wanted to use this episode to share a few pieces from my collection of old miscellanea, documents, postcards, notebooks, photographs and so on, some of which I found over the course of my travels this year. First off, I wanted to show you 2 very special notebooks which I found in a pile of books in front of an antique shop in beautiful Brunswick. They are very high quality with sturdy covers and fine pages. That and quite a bit of luck explains how they survived for well over a century. I know exactly how old one is because its original owner, a girl by the name of Agnes Tuxen, wrote the date 1855 on the inside of the cover. What you are seeing here is Agnes's handwritten poetry collection. She used a notebook to collect her favorite poems, writing them down in her lovely and impeccable penmanship in perfectly straight lines. There is even a table of contents at the end. Her collection contains a mixture of German classics such as Goethe and Schiller, but also contemporary poets such as Ludwig Uhland, who died in 1862, Friedrich Rückert, died in 1866, Eduard Mörike, died in 1875, or Emanuel Geibel, died in 1844. From this perspective, Agnes wasn't very different from today's poetry enjoyers. In fact, poetry collections of this kind were very common well into the 20th century. The second notebook was left unfinished, and I nearly did not buy it until I realized it had also belonged to Agnes. These notebooks survived together for well over a century. It would have been thoughtless to separate them now. However, this second notebook turned out to be not quite what it first seemed. It had Agnes's name on the inside cover, but it seems to have been used by someone called Albert L., probably Ludwig, Schulz, to write his own poetry between 1873 and 1874. Could she have been his mother? Did he happen to find her notebook in the family library and decided to use it for his own literary attempts? It's a bit of a mystery. Interestingly enough, Albert writes exclusively in English, and in very eloquent English too, which in 1874 was a clear marker of an excellent education and a wealthy background. As for his literary talent, well, let's take a look. Here is a poem he titled To Miss E. of Hamburg. "'Tis not among the woodland lawns or highland hills you dwell. The summer sun for you ne'er dawns in Andalusia's dells. However my thoughts in romance bide to sing of your abode, they also seek to gently hide what might be cold in road. Tread softly over this hallowed ground, 'tis here the dead find rest, the ashes of the homeward bound, endeared to many rest. Among the villages of the dead, your cottage stands alone. In happiness and love 'tis said that you enjoy your home. May Providence still hold for you a bright and happy lot, for one so kind and purely true. All else I'd wish is not. May you partake of every joy for which your heart may crave. May aught in life ever dare a soul so young and brave. May home and friends remain to you until your latest day." And he goes on in this way for 2 more stanzas. One of the themes which he seems to be terribly fond of is death. It appears quite unexpectedly in his work, sometimes completely unrelated to the topic at hand. For example, in another poem, this time dedicated to a certain Miss Simpson, he begins quite innocently. "Behold this day at early noon with childish joy and pure delight. Think of the day when you were home, your parents' joy, with faces bright, looked at that which hereafter be a friend to all, to none an enemy. That many a year of happiness, from care and sorrow free, be yours to enjoy, yours to possess, in endless plenty. So far, it reads like a sweet poem dedicated to a friend or perhaps a young lady he was interested in. But then, in the next stanza, he veers into a completely different direction. Is soul that matter which by death set free leaves the body and fills eternity? Or is it thought that, when life must depart, fills ether like some place and space apart? One can only wonder what Miss Simpson thought of these lines, if they ever reached her eyes, that is. Albert also dedicates a poem to a Miss R, and this time he does something a little different. He writes from her perspective. It seems like Miss R, whoever she was not too keen on marriage. I'll never be a wife, no, not in all my life, unless of some hoary-headed poet, that all the world should know it, or of some great and worthy sage who'd all my happiness presage, who would humbly bend a knee and tenderly urge his plea that I should his forever be. I am loftier than you all, though in truth I am but small. For sure one of my greatest hopes was to have the 9th of popes. It seems that Albert might be just a smidge critical of Miss R's character and her taste in men here. I'm not entirely sure, but the 9th of popes could be a reference to an English game of cards called Pope Joan. It was very popular in the 1800s, and it was played with the help of a board and a deck of cards. The Pope was actually the 9th of diamonds, and was the most powerful card in the game. So this presumably young lady seems to have considered herself very important and ambitious, but in Albert's opinion her ambition was small and vapid, and she was a little bit ridiculous. We don't know what Miss R did to Albert to end up immortalized in such unflattering terms here, and unfortunately we will never know because he had the gallantry to censor her name. All in all, I think we can agree that Albert is not that great of a poet. He meanders quite a bit and veers off in unexpected directions, and some of his rhymes are questionable, but I personally find all this very endearing. We are a century and a half away from the time Albert was writing his rhymes, and yet people, especially young people, are still writing poetry privately. It's a very comforting kind of continuity. The clumsiness and awkwardness of the lines don't really matter in the end, do they? We're just reaching across the river of time and catching a little spark of life. Now it's time for the pièce de résistance, an Art Nouveau postcard album I found in Ravensburg. What is special about this album is that it still contains the postcards of its original owner. Normally, when such albums leave their original family, they are stripped of their postcards so each can be sold separately. Therefore, in finding this album at least partially intact, I had a wonderful stroke of luck. It belonged to a woman called Mina, and by looking at the postcards, we can piece together a part of her life. Here, for example, we see her maiden name, Elbe. The man who sent her this postcard is a certain A. Bodlin. As we find from other postcards, he is Albert, her future husband. Eschen, 3rd of February 1919. Dear Mina, warm greetings from East Frisia to you and the children, and see you soon. Albert. From this postcard, we find out that by 1919, Mina and Albert already had multiple children. I was intrigued enough to look for more information about the Bodlins, and one of the easiest ways to do so is to look at old address books. Most of the postcards were sent to an address located in the town of Gifhorn in Lower Saxony. I rummaged through a 1938 address book of Gifhorn, and lo and behold, here is Albert Bodlin living at the exact address written on Mina's postcards. Something must have happened to him because he's listed as an invalid. The First World War, perhaps? In a later edition of the address book, this time from 1941, Albert appears again, but this time he's not alone. Another Albert is living with him, Albert Jr., his and Mina's son, whose profession is listed as glassblower. So between 1938 and 1941, Albert Jr. finished his apprenticeship, which in Germany is completed at the age of 18, and started working. Mina does not appear in the address book. Only people who had a job were listed, from which we can safely conclude that she was a housewife. The Second World War makes its presence known in the album through postcards from the front. Here is one such postcard from Albert Jr., addressed to a woman called Alma Bodlin. In the West, 27th of August, 1942. Dear Alma, I'm sending you the warmest regards. We have been moved from the east to the west. We like it here quite well, but we would all rather go back to the east. It was a nice service in the end. Above all, we missed the connection of the front. Otherwise, I'm fine. Hope the same from you. Send me word from you. Many warm greetings. On the side of the postcard, he wrote, Best regards to father, and where is Heinrich? There are several postcards in the album addressed to Mrs. Alma Bodlin, mostly from the front in 1942, but there was one addressed to her under the family name Alma Meyer, dated 1928, which means she must have married into the Bodlin family. Perhaps she married Albert Jr. As for the Heinrich Albert was asking about, he was a Bodlin too. There is a postcard addressed to him in the album. He seems to have been either another child of Mina and Albert Sr., or perhaps a cousin, the son of Albert's brother Paul. I know that Albert had a brother named Paul because, in 1913, he received a postcard from him containing New Year's wishes. Just look at that glorious Sütterlin script. Albert Jr. asking Alma about Heinrich's location could be a clue that Heinrich was fighting as well. It was only 1942. Things were still going well for Germany, which could explain Albert's seemingly cheerful words. But even so, things are never what they seem. When I removed it to take a look at its back, a surprise was waiting for me. Behind the postcard was a delicate piece of paper, so fragile that I was afraid to touch it. It contained a poem so old I could only find variations of it in books from the early 1900s. Over the graves in the distant land, I extend in spirit a blessing hand, you who know our dear pain, still our bleeding hearts. Over the great army of the dead, over the sleepers in the deep sea, over hearts so heavy, oh, have mercy, God and Lord. Bless us, O Lord. Lift the suffering of war from all, give us peace of heart in all strife. Give with your strong hand peace to the homeland, the German land. Give us peace, O Lord. Peace would not yet come for another 3 years. We have here more postcards related to the military containing song lyrics. Here we see an idealized German soldier dancing with an equally idealized blonde German woman. The title of the song is Westerwald, and it is a 19th century German folk and marching song about the mountain range Westerwald. Then we have another postcard with the lyrics of Lili Marleen, a wildly popular romantic soldier song sung by Leo Anderson in 1939. Outside the barracks, by the corner light, I'll always stand and wait for you at night. We will create a world for two. I'll wait for you the whole night through. For you, Lili Marleen. Originally a catastrophic flop, the song began its unexpected ascent to stardom in the spring of 1941, when a young officer by the name of Karl-Heinz Reintgen was tasked with designing a program for the Wehrmacht radio station in Belgrade. He had to have enough material to fill up 21 hours of airtime, and to his dismay, he realized that he did not have nearly enough records for that purpose. So he quickly sent someone to Vienna to grab some material from the Reichs radio station there. To his great disappointment, he received either records which were unplayable or contained songs whose lyrics were not aligned with the National Socialist ideology. Finally, 4 months into his job and out of ideas, he decided to play the Lili Marleen song. Not because he liked it, but as a gesture to one of his friends who loved the song. The friend was somewhere on a battlefield, and Reintgen hoped that he might hear it. A week later, Reintgen was flooded with thousands of letters per day from German soldiers from all over Europe who requested the song. Not one to disappoint, he played the song every hour until he could not stand it anymore because he had to listen to it over and over again and, after reaching the end of his rope, took the song off the air. He was promptly flooded with thousands of letters of protest from soldiers. Lili Marleen had to stay, but Reinken wanted to also protect his sanity, and so he found a compromise. He would play the song every evening at 9:57 p.m. as the last song before the news. German soldiers everywhere realized this, and millions of them would develop a new ritual, listening to the song once a day if they could, and forgetting about the front for 3 minutes. But strangely enough, the popularity of Lili Marleen did not resume to German soldiers. English soldiers began to write to the radio station, requesting the song they had heard from the loudspeakers of the German lines. In North Africa, as soon as the song began, English soldiers would shout over to the Germans to turn up the volume. And for a little while, all was peaceful. The Reich's propaganda minister Goebbels banned the song in 1942 because Lael Anderson and her husband's helping of Jews was uncovered. But nobody, Reinken included, actually cared about the ban. The song kept playing every day as usual at 9:57 p.m. without any repercussions. There are many other postcards here, some with very difficult to decipher handwriting. As you can see, Hitler's face is on many of these stamps. His face was everywhere, in true classic dictator fashion, and when the regime fell, there was a purge of National Socialist symbols and imagery from German society. Streets were renamed, Hitler's photograph was cut off from the front pages of books. Some people went as far as to go through their family photographs with a pencil and black out any swastikas they found. If you were borrowing a book from a German library, you would be charged via a small note attached to the front page of the book to report any National Socialist content. It was truly a gargantuan effort to rid a society of more than a decade of propaganda and programming. The greatest surprise for me was the little envelope I found in between the pages of the album. To my astonishment, it turned out to be a collection of photographs, stored in the paper cover belonging to a photography studio. And here we have it, ladies and gentlemen, the Bodlin family. We can see Alma here, and this is presumably Albert. Look at the little boy in the photograph. I think it's Albert Jr. As an adult, he's wearing a Nazi uniform. By 1950-1951, neither Albert Sr. nor his son appear as living in Gifhorn anymore. It's likely that Albert Bodlin Sr. passed away. As for his son, he could have perished in the war or simply moved away to another city. If there is enough curiosity, I can find out more biographical information about the Bodlins, such as when they were born, when they died, and, if we want to be very ambitious, even what the two Alberts did in the war. Next, I wanted to show you this photograph which I found in the same antique shop where I found Alma's album. It is a portrait of a young man in German military uniform. I'm not very good with German military insignia, so don't quote me on this, but I suspect he might have been a sergeant in the Luftwaffe. We can also see that he received a medal for something. Tell me what you think. I know some of you are really good with uniforms. Judging by the looks of it, this picture used to have a frame which either fell off or was removed, and there are traces of lined notebook paper on the back, so perhaps something was written there. I could see it hanging in a living room somewhere for a long time. If you look very closely at the photograph, you can see that the photographer or someone on his team went over it with a sharp pencil and added lines to make the picture look sharper. You could see it here on the collar and on the lips, for example. A primitive version of Photoshop, if you will. There was no name anywhere, unfortunately. I took a peek at the back of the photograph itself, but found nothing, so the young man will remain a mystery. To end on a funny note, I visited the toy museum in Görlitz, Saxony some time ago, and I was stunned to see in one of the display cases a toy identical to one I used to have as a child. This is the toy in question. Not from the museum, but my own. The chicken and the little chick bob up and down when you shake them. Has anyone ever seen this toy? Tell me in the comments if you recognize it. In any case, never have I felt more like a fossil than in that moment. However, it got me thinking, and when I visited my parents this year, I went into the garage and dug out a sack of old toys, fished out the plastic chicken I just showed you, and appraised my remaining dolls, from which I picked the one that looked the most presentable. I figured if I leave it here, it will simply keep decaying, so why not spruce it up and donate it to a toy museum? This way, it will be taken care of and properly stored, and who knows, maybe one day other children will look at it and be just as fascinated as I am when I marvel at the kinds of toys children from centuries past used to play with. My mother was against the idea. She said that I should save them for my children. The problem is, 1, I do not have children, and 2, if I do end up having any, and they are even half as destructive as I was as a child, then I might as well take the toys apart right now and save me the trouble. When I started first grade, she gifted me this beautiful white fountain pen which had belonged to her as a student. She managed to keep that pen intact and working for so many years, and I think I dropped it and cracked it within my first week at school. And now I'm a little sad about it because as an adult, of course, I would have cherished it and taken care of it, but as a 7-year-old, well, you get the point. Alright everyone, so that would be all for today's episode of Evo Says. Let me know what you think of my discoveries. Tell me about your childhood toys and how you would feel if you would see them in a museum. And I will see you next time. Take care.